Was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, by the Iowa Bankers Association. For personal, business, and commercial needs, Iowa banks help Iowans reach their financial goals. And by the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
On statewide Iowa Public Television, this is the Friday, July 6th edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
The 110th U.S. Congress is now in a July 4th holiday recess. Some say the week off couldn't have come at a better time. Along with big challenges concerning Iraq and worldwide terrorism, Congress is wrestling with controlling the nation's borders. Although nearly everyone agrees something must be done, the hows and whys of border control and immigration reform are vexing. Iowa's 5th District Congressman Steve King, a relative newcomer from the middle of the nation, would seem to be an unlikely immigration icon. But he's been outspoken on the issue since his initial campaign for Congress. Now in his 3rd term in the House of Representatives, Congressman King joins us today. Welcome back to Iowa Press.
Thanks very much, Dean. I'm really happy to be here.
I've been hearing you on national talk shows on the immigration issue, so we're glad to have you here, and we're going to be questioning you on that.
I finally now understand how important it is for the public to weigh in, and I want to make sure they're well informed, and they surely did weigh in last week.
I want to introduce our panelists here, Des Moines Register political columnist David Yepsen and Radio Iowa News Director Kay Henderson.
Congressman, what now on this immigration reform issue that, as Dean said, is so vexing?
Well, first, I want to make sure that the United States Senate and the White House understand that their comprehensive amnesty plan is dead. And it was dead before, and they resurrected it, and now it's dead a second time. And pretty much everybody concludes that bringing a comprehensive plan isn't going to work. The American people did rise up and reject it. So if anything is to come with immigration, there's 2 approaches. One, I'm asking the White House, now use the tools you have to enforce the laws we have. And the second component can be, if we can find some pieces of the comprehensive approach that encourage enforcement, then we ought to try to go down that path, but it has to be bipartisan if we're going to get it done. And so whether we can find agreement or not, I have to sit down with the chair of the Immigration Subcommittee, where I'm ranking member, Zoe Lofgren, and have that conversation. I know there's a little bit floating around out there about pieces they'd like to do, but I'm not sure we can come to agreement on what they are.
Well, it seems like a converse statement to say the White House needs to understand it's dead, and then we may resurrect some of the pieces. Isn't that kind of a converse argument?
Well, if I say the comprehensive is, the pieces that I think that we could bring up would be components that give the administration more tools to enforce. And that's about all that I think has a chance of passing either in the House or in the Senate, and that'd be the approach to bring.
Do you think, though, that this issue may be just sort of set on the table and brought up in the next Congress after the next election?
That's actually most likely what will happen, and both sides will push on the things we'd like to see emerge, and probably nothing emerges unless we can find that consensus on pieces, and the only thing I can think would be enforcement. So what we're really looking for here, I believe, are presidential candidates that emerge through this nomination process that are strong on immigration, that they can somehow or another work their way through this next nomination cycle and general election and arrive at the White House with a mandate from the people to fix this problem that has been a cumulative effect of neglect for the last 10 and 20 years.
Congressman, is one option here simply dealing with border security or dealing with employer sanctions? I mean, there does seem to be, the polling would indicate that there does seem to be a pretty broad national consensus to really tighten or seal the borders. Mm-hmm. There is a broad consensus to deal with sanctions on employers who hire illegal aliens. Why not just do those things?
I am for that, and I hope we can get a consensus to do that. And in fact, you hear Democrats and Republicans speak about border security and employer enforcement. They may be willing to go down that path. I'm not yet convinced, because the political gain on the left side is so strong for the broader approach of a legalization process. That's what the American people have rejected, was a legalization of people that are illegally here. So the political motive is there for those on the left, but I'm not sure they're willing to take some pressure off the pressure cooker and go along with enforcement because of that.
So what you're saying is that you don't have the votes to do the first two unless you bring along unless you give something on this, the amnesty question, the legalization question, whichever term you want to use.
And that's been the
to
case
describe
throughout this entire debate. 3.5 years ago, I wrote a letter to the president on the eve of his speech, laid this out the way it would unfold, and we saw it happen last week.
But Congressman, do you think the votes are there in the House and in the Senate to do just something on border security or do just something on employer sanctions?
Oh, I believe the votes are there, but will Nancy Pelosi allow it to come to the floor is the question, and I don't think she will. I'll say I'm concerned that she will not, because if she does so, then they will be giving up, I think, on that opportunity for all the political gain that they could get by legalizing the people that are here illegally.
And you said a moment ago that the administration should enforce the laws on the books.
Mm-hmm.
What would that mean? What is the practical effect of that? How would that be? What would be different than what we're doing now if we enforce the laws on the books?
Well, one is a more effective border enforcement, and I can go back to that. But the other piece that really hasn't been turned up very well is the workplace enforcement. And they've come in and done some raids that are highly publicized. The SWIFT raids would be the most highly publicized from across the country. But it hasn't been consistent enforcement. And if you look at those years, we've seen the employers that have been sanctioned on charges for hiring illegals go to one of those years, and I don't recall if it's 04 or 05, down to 0. So they haven't been consistent. Publicity is one thing, but you have to actually apply the law consistently across the board. They haven't been doing that.
Congressman, you've been critical of the president on this issue. What do you see from him after the second failure in the Senate? Do you see any change?
You know, I have to say, I like the man personally, and I do. I appreciate the job he's done in a good number of areas. This we disagree on, and I don't know how he's going to react, because when he acts, I believe that he acts on a fundamental principle that he believes in. I think he's got the premise wrong. So how he reacts now is pattern. Sometimes he's pulled back, so security reform might be a pattern that we could follow on that. He may just pull back and seek to do a good job of governing, but I would ask him to use the powers of administration to enforce current law.
If Congress were to, as you suggest, do the enforcement of laws already on the books, or strengthen what is there, enabling legislation on employer sanctions and border security, that does leave the elephant in the living room, and that is amnesty and what to do about those who are here. What should be done about that then? You just can't ignore that.
Well, I always say you can't deport 12 million people. I don't know anybody that actually advocates that we should do so. I wouldn't concede that that couldn't be done. I just don't think it's the most practical solution. So once you start to shut off the jobs magnet by employer sanctions, then people will find out that they're here illegally, but their job opportunities are drying up. As they dry up, they will go back to their home country gradually. And if we look at the pattern during Eisenhower's administration, he actually did do a fairly intense deportation. And they got approximately 10 voluntary deportations for every one that went unwillfully. And that's the only formula we have. I don't know if it'd be that good, but we could have the debate while that's going on.
I've heard you use the word anchor babies, and I think what you mean by that is women who may be here illegally, not naturalized citizens, but deliver children who are in the United States, then staying because those children are citizens. Is that what you mean?
Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes they come here to have the baby. For example, a pregnant Chinese potential mother, or mother for that matter, the price tag to travel to the United States illegally, have the baby, get the birth certificate, and go back home until that baby gets old enough to apply for the extended family piece, that's $30,000. So, but we have 350,000 babies born in America on an average year that are babies born to both the father and the mother are illegal, and that gives a path for the chain migration. Chain migration can go from one person that's here, one anchor baby can bring as many as 270 in. So we have to shut that off. No other nation has that kind of policy.
Congressman, is there any talk of Congress speaking on that question? I've heard the argument made that the founders and the people who wrote the 14th Amendment, the legal authority under which this has become the nation's practice, it wasn't intended that there be anchor babies and that people could come in and have children and those children would be citizens. My question is Congress going to weigh into this in any fashion, or is that just settled law in America?
I wouldn't think it's settled law, and Perhaps it's because I believe that we should be able to end the anchor baby process, the guaranteed citizenship piece of this. But the line in the Constitution that says citizen and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that language exempted originally those born in Indian reservations, and also those born as sons and daughters of ambassadors, people that we know are here visiting, as some tourists for that matter. So I believe it's a practice, not a constitutional guarantee, but regardless, if we pass a statute, that's where you test the constitutionality of it, so the place to start is in Congress. I don't think the American people are there yet. I think they have to have a national conversation. Right now it's a toss of the coin if the American people would support that initiative or not.
Congressman Tom Tancredo, an ally of yours in this fight, has suggested that we have a pause on really all immigration, legal, illegal, other, not just people from Latin countries. What do you think of that idea, that we just put a pause, a hold on everything to allow for a period of assimilation?
Perhaps a moratorium. I think that I'm not ready to draw that bright a line on our immigration policy. I say this, that there's some smart immigration policy out there that we should be encouraging and enhancing, and I support a point system so that we can bring in greater numbers of people that statistically are going to enhance our economy and assimilate into this society. But if we shut everything off, I think we lose that opportunity. H-1Bs, the skills that are going into Silicon Valley, for example. So, but I think we need to get the illegal traffic going back home again, and as that flow would go and perhaps increase, we could see how we get to the end of this immigration policy. I don't really want to shut it all the way off.
Congressman, as we go out and cover events on the political stage here in Iowa, the other topic that comes up most often is Iraq. Could you give us, from your perspective, a status report on what you think is happening in that country?
Well, first of all, I'm going back there very soon. And the reason that I travel to Iraq on a fairly regular basis is because I don't believe I can get a straight briefing from the Pentagon in a setting of classified briefing, congressional classified briefing, because they know that they fill the room up with 200 or so members of Congress. There's somebody in there that can't wait to spill those classified beans out to the press. And so the only way I can get up to speed on what's going on in Iraq is to either ask for a private briefing, which I don't want to tie up our top people to do, or go over there. So, but what I see today is what I see in the news. And I do not believe that we should be setting our national destiny and our global destiny by reading the New York Times or watching some of the mainstream television that's out there. The numbers statistically in the surge say that it's working. David Petraeus, General Petraeus, who is the author of this plan, the architect of it, and the commander of it, is in a very difficult no-win situation, or very difficult to win situation, I believe, in that if he says that the report that he will deliver in September, if he says things are going well, he'll be called a liar. If he says things are marginal or not as good as they should be, they will say that's proof that this initiative has failed. I think we need to think about the stakes in the Middle East. The 70 to 80% of Iraq's oil is controlled by the Shias. The Iranians have been fighting a proxy war against the United States for probably 3 years in Iraq, and we need to look at this from the broader perspective of, are we going to tolerate a nuclear Iran, Ahmadinejad, with a nuclear and a means to deliver it? That's question number one. I say no. And the second one is, I don't know of any insurgency that's been defeated when they had a sovereign nation as a sanctuary, especially one that trained them and funded them. I want to address that problem. I think we have to do that, and I want to sit down with our commanders and push hard on that, because if we pull out, the Sunni Triangle becomes the base for the Al-Qaeda, the Shias become the base for the Iranians, and we've got a big problem, and they control the oil for the world.
It sounds as if, beyond the surge, you would push more troops into the theater.
I would want to sit down with our commanders and talk to them about what strategies might be out there to understand it better. Last time I actually went with a lot of the surge strategy in me, and that was Thanksgiving last year. That developed after I came back home again. It was logical and rational to me to see what they proposed. I'd like to see what else they can propose today.
Congressman, haven't the American people concluded that we've really lost this war, that we're in the midst of a civil war now, that for all the good intentions we had going in, every poll that you see shows that there's just no consensus for this thing now. In fact, the consensus seems to be getting out. Isn't that what you hear from your constituents? Increasingly,
yes. And I don't know that that's the consensus in Iowa or the consensus in my district, but increasingly that's the press that I'm hearing and the reports that come from the polling. Here's my central concern, and I have set up some meetings in the next couple of weeks to address this, and I'm not in a position to fix it, I'm just in a position to weigh in. And that's this, that the object of war is to destroy the enemy's will and ability to conduct war. That's von Clausewitz. If you can destroy their will, you've destroyed their ability. Sun Tzu says when you reach the epitome of warfare, you've destroyed the enemy's will before any conflict begins. We went at this the other way. We began telling our enemy that we didn't have the will to complete this war. And I don't know if we can win another long, protracted war, no matter what the casualties are, if we're going to have the press pounding this into the American people that we should be pulling out. And so it encourages the will of the enemy. It breaks down the will of the American populace, which has to be here to support this war. So if we should end up being unsuccessful in that part of the world, it won't be because we are defeated anywhere over there. It'll be because we've defeated ourselves here.
One of the central concerns, I think, of Iowans is how long will we see Iowa Guards people, men and women, deployed into Iraq?
And Dean, I surely don't have that answer.
But does that concern you?
It concerns me. These are all volunteers. They volunteered to serve their country, and they volunteered essentially for these missions because they've all had a chance to re-up since this conflict began. I am proud of our Iowa National Guards. We had some of the highest call-up of any of the National Guard in the nation, and the job that they've done over there, and when you look in their eyes, you know these are brave, patriotic Americans. I don't think we can continue to stretch them thin. I'd like to expand the active duty personnel in our military significantly because I believe there's going to be a global war in this conflict going on for a long, long time. We need to be greater in numbers, and we need to be more nimble and quicker than we are. I want them to come home, but I don't want to ask them to come home and then have the kind of ending that we had in Vietnam. We need a victory in Iraq.
So how do you define a significant increase in active duty military, and how much of the component should the Guard play in a war such as this? Which they're bearing a pretty heavy duty roster on this.
It's a heavy duty, and it's a high price that they've paid. I'm talking in terms of 150,000, but that's really more of a Pentagon request number that we should be looking at rather than just me putting a number out there. I want to hear their advice on this, and we're reconfiguring this military now with brigade combat teams, and this broader, more nimble, and take this load off. I say 150,000 because that's the number that is generally been deployed in Iraq. That would give everybody a little more time at home and take some pressure off the Guard.
There is a Guard unit that's soon to come home, but they've been there for 16 months. Is that the mission of the Guard, to be in theater for 16 months?
It is their mission. They were ordered to go on that mission, but I don't think it was anywhere near the expectations when they signed up for the Guard. I think we need to look at their value also as being people here at home that protect our homeland, and people that bring their professions from years of their skills that add to the skill of our military. So this is the best military that's ever been taken to the field. We need to take some pressure off of them, back their times down.
Congressman, you just said we can't have the same outcome we had in Vietnam. Why not? Vietnam, we lost the war, the troops came home, the country went to the communists, but today they're one of our leading trading partners. The rest of Southeast Asia did not go communist. As a matter of fact, communism had collapsed of its own weight. What's so terrible with the strategy of getting out of Iraq, just like we got out of Vietnam, and in 20 years or 30 years we can be trading with these people that were shooting at us now?
There are several answers to that. One of them is that in the aftermath of us pulling out of Vietnam, we didn't keep our promise to the South Vietnamese troops, for one thing. And there were 2 to 3 million people that died in the aftermath, in the wholesale slaughter that took place after we pulled out of Vietnam. We knew they weren't coming to the United States to attack us. Here, it's a different story. This is where they're expanding a base, where Al-Qaeda wants to have a base to come out and attack us. They've already come here to fight us. They will do the same, and if they have oil revenue to do it, it gets a lot uglier in the Middle East than it might have in the Southeast Asia.
That leads me to my next question about terrorism and events of Great Britain, where you had a domestic and internal terrorist attack. What lessons do you take out of what has happened in Great Britain for what, in recent days, for what we ought to be doing here in the United States with our national security and war on terrorism? Should we be doing anything differently?
I think we should. We've already, it's been demonstrated here in the United States with the Fort Dix 6 that we can have our own homegrown terrorists. Whether they came in as illegal immigrants when they were kids or not, they're homegrown terrorists. Great Britain has realized that. You have immigrants and homegrown terrorists that are attacking the very society that's welcomed them. We know that we have hate mongers preaching hatred within some mosques in the United States. I don't know which ones, and I don't know what they're saying, but I know the FBI can't go into those mosques with a tape recorder and tape that and put the transcript in as part of their intel. A regular citizen can, they can't. I think we need to do a better job of monitoring what's going on, at least in the public sphere in the United States, and I think we need to add to our FBI, add to our CIA, and get our global intel up dramatically. And if we fail to do that, we're not going to be in a position to protect ourselves and preempt, and we're going to have to do those preemptive strikes around the world.
All right, what do you say to people who say, oh, civil liberties, you're going to violate someone's civil liberties if you start doing that?
There's always going to be that balance. And there's always going to be a political polarity that puts people on one side or the other. And I think the FBI went too far with some of their national security letters that they put out. And they got it, it turned into a routine for them. The administration and the people in justice have to respect the law. They have to respect the rights of the citizens, but by the same token, follow that law, but do so with follow the intent of the law, so that we can listen into these telephone conversations that are going overseas, for example. There's no expectations of privacy there. Let's get our intel up, but they need to have a culture of respecting the rights, especially of American citizens.
We haven't much time left, but the Farm Bill rewrite is coming up, and I just want to get you briefly to tell Iowa farmers whether the next Farm Bill will look a lot like the '95 version, or if you think there'll be many changes, just real briefly.
We extended the 2002 commodities title, so most of that, if we can hold that through the markup, which will take place in the week that ends about the 19th of July.
The drafting of the bill,
Yes.
the markup.
That's true, the drafting of the bill, and get that lingo down into the streets and the roads of Iowa. So we're trying to protect that because that's an essential component of it. Mostly, I hear extending the 2002 Farm Bill in its entirety is better than what we might get otherwise. They have shut down some of the components of this from a budget perspective. It's going to be hard to have the kind of Farm Bill we had and hard to make it better than the one we had with the resources that we have.
Congressman, you know we always talk politics on this show. What about your own political future? There's been talk about you running for the U.S. Senate in 2008 against Senator Harkin. There's been talk about you running for governor in 2010. What's your political future?
You know, I don't know what that is. And I thought about that question before I came in here to the studio today. I have told my wife the same things I say to the press. I have not made a decision on whether to challenge Tom Harkin in 08 or not. And if and when that becomes clear to me, I will make an announcement right away. I don't get up in the morning strategizing on how I'm going to advance my political career. I have a lot of work to do with this wonderful privilege of serving the people of America and Iowa and the 5th District in Congress. So that's my straightest, honest answer. That's what my wife knows, that's what Iowa knows, and that's what Americans know.
When do you make a decision about 2010, about 2008, and whether you take on Tom Harkin? Don't you have to be making that decision pretty soon?
You would think that one would go on the calendar and put a red-letter date on there and make that decision. I haven't felt compelled to make a decision on it yet, and so I'm just go at one day at a time. But if Newt Gingrich is hanging out there considering entering the presidency in late September, I think I'm good for a couple months yet.
We got Congressman Lightfoot, we got Congressman Gansky, we've got Congressman Taki, who all tried it. Why would Congressman King succeed?
Well, one thing is that there's a clear distinction between Tom Harkin and Steve King. I mean, you really couldn't have a brighter distinction between two people involved in public life. Tom Harkin sits on the one side, I sit on the other side. I'm for life, clearly, and I'm for slowing this growth of government, in some places shrinking it where I can. I'm for being aggressive in a strong national defense. All those things are differences between Tom Harkin and Steve King. I don't have a personal axe to grind with Tom Harkin. Personally, I get along with him very well. We had a good conversation a couple days ago. It's philosophical, and if that philosophy should drive me to enter into the race, then at that point I'd make an announcement.
How do you assess the Republican Party's prospects in 2008 for holding on to the White House? Polls show Republicans are dispirited. Only 30% of Republican activists are happy with the field of candidates they have. Your party took a thrashing in 2006. Aren't you going to lose the White House in 2008?
I don't know how that's going to unfold, but I had my first sparks of inspiration a couple of weeks ago when I listened to former Congressman Jeb Bradley from New Hampshire speak at a little event that he had in Washington. And he said that in New Hampshire, and it doesn't always come across America the same way, but Iowa and New Hampshire are fairly closely indexed. He said that Democrats have taken over the state House in New Hampshire, the House and the Senate, and they're doing what they do, which is increase taxes, grow spending, and legalize same-sex marriage. And he said the voters in New Hampshire are beginning to realize what they've done when they got tired of Republicans being in charge. That gave me a sense of optimism that Democrats will do what Democrats do. Nancy Pelosi, more correctly, will do what Nancy Pelosi will do. I think that helps our prospects in 2008. And so I'm more optimistic today than I was a month ago, but I'm not making predictions. It's going to be a fight all the way.
I want to go back to Tom Harkin for a minute. The Congressional Research Service says that no other sitting United States senator has defeated more Republican congressmen than Tom Harkin. Kay mentioned three. There are two others, Roger Jepsen, Bill Shirley. What makes you think that you, as the sixth Republican member of Congress to take him on, can beat him?
Well, in fact, I don't know that I've drawn that conclusion yet. And if I did draw that conclusion, I'd be closer to making some kind of an announcement. But the distinctions still come back to, let's just say things change in the political arena. And if something had happened dramatically in immigration, or something happened dramatically in Iraq, if there was a sea change within American politics where the current was flowing towards Republicans instead of away from Republicans, all of those things could contribute to a different kind of a climate. And remember also, Tom Harkin hasn't had what you call landslide victories over those Republicans. They have been close races each time, even when it didn't look like it should be that close.
Another option that I hear Republican activists talk about is that you might in fact run for governor in 2010, that you would in fact conclude that Tom Harkin is too big of a hill to climb in 2008, but that Chet Culver in 2010 might be an easier target. Is that an option for you? Is running for governor an option?
Well, it's clearly an option. I love this state, Dave. I put a lot of my life into it, and I can remember singing We're From Iowa, coming across from Minnesota when we were going on vacations as kids. And I put a lot of my life into state policy, but I also am really engaged in national policy. I think it's my job to serve, and however I've been blessed with this great privilege to serve Iowans and Americans, I want to do the best job I can wherever I am, and it's a calling. I'll keep pouring my energy into it, and that'll be my judgment when the time comes, and the input from Iowans has a lot to do with that, and they're talking to me every day.
That's all the time we have. Thank you for being our guest today and for your insights.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it.
We close with this reminder. Iowa Press is now available on the World Wide Web at the IPTV Internet site. In the archives are transcripts of past editions along with audio and video streaming of Iowa Press programs too. The Internet address is iptv.org. When you get there, just follow the prompts to the Iowa Press site. Well, that's it for this edition of Iowa Press. Back next week, regular airtime, 7:30 Friday night, 11:30 Sunday morning. We'll see you then. I'm Dean Borg. Thanks for joining us today.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, by the Iowa Bankers Association. For personal, business, and commercial needs, Iowa banks help Iowans reach their financial goals. And by the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.